Kwekwe, Minu Pajajik, welcome. Welcome to Indigital Insights. Monique Manatch Indigenous, Kanien'kéha Beck and Dojiba. My name is Monique Manatch, and I'm a member of the Algonquins of Barrier Lake. And today we're speaking with Kahentawaks, and she is Kanien'kehá
Yes.
from
Kanehsatake.
Kanehsatake. Okay. And you're a multidisciplinary artist. You do 3D modeling, you do illustration, game making, you do sculpture. Do you do sculpture like sculpture, or I guess it's both, eh? Digital and hand?
Yeah, it usually starts out digital, and then I find some way to make it in the physical world, depending on, the construction needs and the materials I have available for me.
Amazing. Like, what kinds of things do you sculpt?
So to be honest, I've done, I think, 2 sculptures, but my favorite one was this project called Tree of Life, which was based on the tree in the Haudenosaunee creation story. And it was basically made out of, I sculpted it in Blender in 3D first, and then I put it in this other program that like sliced it into different layers. And then I planned where these dowels would go, and I had like the slices cut out in like a laser cutting machine out of cardboard, and I like glued it all together, and I like crocheted some conductive yarn so that when you touched these certain parts at the base of the tree, the like leaves on the tree lit up.
That's fantastic. I've always wanted to be like, I don't know where these ideas come from. I don't know how artists generate their ideas.
I don't know either. It just comes to you. I'll just be walking down the street or like playing a video game, and then I'll be like, oh, I should try that. And I have this like notepad on my phone where I write it down so that one day when I have the resources and the time, I can come back and be like, oh yeah, I should try that.
Smart. That's a good idea. I've thought about doing that, like with my phone, with write grants, right? Oh, grant project, and try to do I'll talk into my phone, but I've never figured out how to. I run a media arts organization. Can't work my phone.
It's a new habit. It's a whole thing. It took me like years to get into the practice of like writing it down in the moment, because otherwise I would just be like, yeah, I'll remember, and then I never remember and it's gone.
Yeah, neither. I call it memory soup.
Yeah, memory soup.
A spoonful, but oh yeah, that was a good one. Yeah. But often not so much. So you went to Concordia.
I did. Yeah.
Go for it. I'm jealous. I have Concordia envy.
Yeah, it's a great place. I had a good time there. I really enjoyed my degree. I enjoyed like the people I met there and everyone I got to work with. It was a good time.
What did you take?
So I studied the Computation Arts program. I did a specialization in that. So I have a BFA specialization in Computation Arts. And that's where I was working with like Jason and Scavanati at the same time.
So you were the Skins Workshop Associate Director for AbTeC.
Yes, I was. But that was like not the only job that I had there. I had like this whole experience with them where like, I guess started in 2008 when I was a high school student, because I was a participant in like the very first Skins Workshop. Yeah. So I went through all of that with them, where we made like our own video game called Odzi, Rise of the Kanien'kehá Legends. And then I went to college and didn't really see them that much. And then by the time I got to university, I applied to Jason's program, Computation Arts at Concordia. And we didn't really see each other. But then I started doing 3D courses, and they happened to need a 3D instructor for another Skins workshop. So they reached out to whoever was teaching the 3D courses at the time, and they were like, do you have any students that kind of stand out that might be interested in being instructors? And like that professor gave my name, like without me knowing. And so I got an email from Nancy, who was one of the, I guess she's the producer for AbTeC IIF. And she was like, oh, Kahentawaks, is it the same Kahentawaks I'm thinking of from like back at Ganawage Survival School? And I went, yes, that's me. And then I came in and did an interview, and I got the job. And then I worked there for like 4 years. And by the time I left, I had gone through like, I guess, two promotions, ultimately landing in Skins Workshop Associate Director. So I was like the participant, I was the instructor, and then I was like the person directing all the workshops going on, which was big responsibility, but it was fun.
That's amazing. That must have been just so cool because you're working with all this new technology.
Mm-hmm.
What is IF?
It's the Initiative for Indigenous Futures.
What's that about?
So I always get this mixed up in my mind, but there's like Aboriginal Territories in Cyberspace and the Initiative for Indigenous Futures, and one of them is like a container organization for the other. But basically, they both do like the skins workshops and symposiums and event stuff that I can't remember off the top of my head anymore because it's been a while. But yeah, lots of cool things.
So you've made a lot of games. What kind of games have you made?
So mostly like with my work at Revital, if we're like not talking about my time with AbTeC IIF, we've made language learning games for a few different communities, institutions.
Tell me about that. Actually, we're very interested in creating a language learning game.
Yeah. So I guess I could start with the process. So normally, like a community or a school will approach us, and they either have an idea for a video game that they want already, or they come to us with like these pre-existing materials, like PDFs of storybooks that they published in like the 80s or 90s, audio recordings, or some like archival sort of things, flashcards, and they're basically just like, out of these existing resources, how can you like sort of digitize it or take it to the next level, give it some kind of interactive element and make it into a game. So we've done that, and today I think we've made 6 language learning games that were kind of like for this particular school that wants to remain anonymous, which is cool with me. But now what we're currently working on is like an in-house project that is going to be 4 Mohawk or Kanien'kéha language learning games based on Haudenosaunee legends. And they're going to be completely free for the community to access. And yeah, we're thinking about giving access to like non-Indigenous people through like libraries and things like that, but they're going to be charged a subscription to like get that cash flow coming in to fund making more games, which we can then keep giving to the community for free. And yeah, that's my plan so far.
It's amazing. It's such a good idea. I wondered about that. So with the legends, though, are people going to be okay with taking those legends and using? That was one of the things that I wondered, because we were looking at doing an Algonquin game, and we work with people out in Mi'kmaq territory, in Newfoundland on the western coast. And so we were talking about using the legends, but then we were thinking, is there an intellectual property element where the community may say, do you have permission to, and can, like, how do you work through that process?
Yeah. So in our case, the legends that we're working with are stories that we both heard told orally through different community members as we were growing up as kids. And then they also had these stories written down in books that were locally published, you know, with the plastic spiral bound sort of thing, with the pencil crayon drawings that I'm sure exist in everyone's community in some way. So yeah, those things, like in regards to the books that they had made, I understand like they own that version of the story, they own the translation because they put the work into, you know, making those resources. But the story itself, for example, what we're working on now is the story of the flying head. That belongs to like all of our Kanien'kéha communities, and probably extended out to, you know, the rest of the Confederacy, right? Because there's a lot of overlap. So the way we're dealing with it is like, we're not just taking word for word of the story that was in this printed book. Like, we're retelling them. Like, I've rewritten the story in like a modern context, because one of my memories I have from my time like attending Kanien'kéha immersion school and having these stories told to me was that I was like, well, first of all, none of these people in these stories look like me. They don't live in any place that looks like where I've lived. They were like all set in pre-colonial times. So I remember being a kid and kind of being like, well, I get that this is something that's from our history, but like, what am I supposed to be getting from this? It's hard for me to connect to this because I don't see myself or like what I perceive as, my people's way of life in a modern time in it. So I'm rewriting it to take place in the present day, but while keeping the same sort of morals. And funny thing, I recently had a meeting with our language consultant who's working with us on this project. Because part of what I'm doing is like going through the Mohawk translated version of the script and being like, okay, is this word a verb? Is this word a noun? Is this word a particle? And trying to figure out like how we're going to teach that in these games. And so I was speaking with him about all that while going through the script. And he was like, when you first sent this script to me, it reminded me of the way that my uncle would tell the story, because everybody's heard the version of like, the pre-colonial thing where everyone's wearing the buckskin, everyone's got the long hair. But his uncle told the story like it took place in present day in Joerodo. And so he was like, yeah, I thought that was so cool because it made it, more relevant for today, because it seemed like, oh, that could be something that happened to my neighbor. And yeah, so I just thought it was really cool. And that's what I'm hoping to do with the other games that we make as well. Because there's the Flying Head is the first out of 4 that we'll be making hopefully over the next year if we're remaining on schedule.
That's the question.
Yeah.
It is with us anyway. Yeah, exactly. What a great idea. I mean, you make it relevant for the nation, not just for the kids learning it, but for everybody.
Yeah.
And if non-Indig are looking at this, then they see us more as because it is so easy for people to pigeonhole and say, do you still live in teepees? Well, we never lived in teepees.
Yeah, exactly.
You're right. Something that could have happened to my neighbor. We were kind of looking at that with we have our own, there's the trickster, and there's we have other ones in my community, stories that I've been told by people in my community, and yeah, how do you make that relevant? Because some of them, like we have, they call them, well, it was my cousin, she was calling them mermaids, but they actually live in rocks.
Oh, cool.
And they swim through the rocks.
Yeah.
And so they can be good. They will respond to you as you behave.
So it like matches your energy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you're a good person, if you're a kind person, they'll be the same. And the same with we call them Pogajanini, the little people.
Oh yeah. We have the same.
I thought you did. Yeah.
Yeah. That's actually one of the legends we're going to be working on too. So I'm excited for you to see it now.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, there was a guy in our community, and unfortunately he's gone now. He was so amazing, just so like he was the epitome of the culture. But he was, he was like just a guy. He'd gone to residential school, but then he spent 15 years just studying with his grandmother in the bush.
Oh wow, that's so
what he did.
great.
Yeah, and he knew this. He knew all the and the language and all of that. But they said that there was a story about him that when he was about 3, he disappeared. He got lost. Like they lived in the bush. They lived in the because my community was only actually formed in 1961.
Oh wow, that's pretty recent.
Yeah, exactly. And before that, they lived in their camps. Their hunting camps, and they followed the trails, right? So, depending on what time of year it was, they'd stay so long, and then they'd move and go to the next place, and whatever was whatever they were gathering, or whatever. Anyways, so they were in the bush, and he disappeared, and he was gone for like 4 days.
Oh my God.
And he was 3.
Yeah, that's really young.
Yeah. And so everybody's freaking out, looking for him and looking for him and looking for him. And then like when he came home, he just walked into camp, and he was fed and he was clean.
Oh wow.
In the bush.
Yeah.
So it's not like there were people around, they were just, and he was fine. He said, and then he, when he got home, he's like, well, he wanted to go again. I want to go be with my friends with the little He didn't say little people, but they knew that he meant little people because
Yeah.
he thought they were kids like him. But then he said, no, they're not kids. Like they're not
Yeah.
kids.
They're
They
small, but they're not, children up here.
Yeah, exactly. They took care of him and they showed him stuff and and this was what he said to everybody, when he got home that, these friends, they were friends
Mm.
and he wanted to, go back. And so for a long time, his mom, she said, I had to pretty much keep him like right by my side. I was constantly worried about where he was because he wanted to take off and go spend
Yeah.
time with his friends.
Wow.
And
That's crazy.
right?
Oh my God.
Yeah. Talk about in modern context, like,
Yeah,
it-
seriously.
all these terrible things could have happened to this kid, and yet he came home and he was happy and he hadn't been harmed and he was fed and he was clean and like
Yeah, they took care of him.
they took care of him. They did, and he turned out to be this guy who was like, oh, I can't. He preserved. He passed on so much of the culture
Hmm.
around him.
You could
He was
probably
just,
tell he was chill.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. He was chill too.
There's good
So,
vibes coming off this guy.
yeah, he was. Yeah, he was. He was like this totally laid back guy. Like he was. He'd tell you like the craziest stories in this just casual, tone. Yeah. So having like you really relate to this kind of thing. Like I
Mhm.
do anyway, and I can see that it would. I remember telling my son about that. But that Jacob, and well, Jacob, and this is what happened. And Liam was like, "Wow!" And he's looking around the woods, like they're gonna.
Yeah.
We're in the bush. We're up at his parents' or his family's hunting camp. He's, you know, he's looking around. They're gonna
Just
take me,
looking out
Mom.
for the little people in the woods.
Exactly, exactly. What other legends are you doing?
So I said the flying head. We're doing the little people. There's also the story of how the Bear Clan became medicine keepers. And I think the last one is the seven dancers.
Oh,
Yeah.
like the Seven Sisters or the Stars?
The stars, yeah. The Pleiades constellation origin story.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have one like that too. And the how the bear became medicine. We have a creation story where the bear helped human beings.
Yeah?
And yeah, because the human beings fell out of the sky. Okay, well, they were being lowered in a basket by the spider.
Mm-hmm.
Wanted to come to Earth, and then they weren't supposed to look over the side, but they did, and they fell,
Oh.
and they landed in a tree. And they
Mhm.
asked all these animals to help them, and nobody would help them or couldn't help them. The beer, sorry, the deer is like, look at my hooves, like I can't
I
come to.
don't have thumbs.
Exactly. Yeah, no, okay, we get it. Yeah. So the bear came and Makwa, so they helped. So bear is like, and she's always, when I tell the story, it's always like, oh, humans, oh, they're here now, great.
Yeah.
So she gets up and she helps them, and then she shows them where to eat because anything a bear can eat, we can eat. Where to find medicine because the bear is one of the only animals that will actually look for medicine when they're not feeling well, and they
Yeah.
know what to take.
Wow.
So we consider the bear like a brother or sister. We don't hunt bear in my community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the same for us because we have a Bear Clan, right? I'm
Yeah,
Bear Clan. So like part of the whole thing is like their relatives, if they're clan animals, so like you don't eat them. You don't hunt them. That would be very weird.
yeah. And they say that the skeleton of a bear is really similar to a human being.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that.
And we have a bear. Yeah, we have Bear Clan too, actually. Yeah, it's one of our
That
big.
makes sense. We're neighbors.
Yeah, exactly. Well, especially Kanehsatake,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because the Kanien'kéha Algonquins came from like the Lake of Two Mountains.
Did they?
Yeah, that was their original. But then when they made the reserve, they're like, "Oh well, you Algonquins can live on this reserve too." And we're like, "That's a different nation.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, we're not the same nation. We move like, you know."
Yeah. Like we're
So
not just, the Indians.
yeah, like, "Oh, you guys." No.
Yeah.
So then they created a reserve in where KZ is now, where Kanien'kéha is just about an hour and a half north of here.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
my family actually comes
Oh,
from there.
cool.
Yeah. And
Cool.
my son was doing the ancestry.ca thing. Do you
Mhm.
guys Well, and there's an ancestor who came from Kanehsatake.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, yeah, it's like 3 or 4 generations back. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. He's like, look at this, and I'm like, oh my god, that's incredible. Like, I was really surprised. Well, I shouldn't have been surprised because there was a lot of we were so close. I mean,
Yeah, there's a lot of intermingling,
yes,
intermarriage.
not even teepees. We didn't have teepees. There was
Yeah.
so. How do you? What kind of software? Like, what kind of? Yeah, how are you putting these things together?
So the main things we use, I'll skip all the boring like team productivity stuff, like all the scheduling apps and whatever, but the main meat of it is like the game engine we use is called Unity. And then inside Unity, we use, I don't even know what to call it, I guess a package called Nani Novel that like is basically the framework for making a visual novel style video game where you have like your background, you have your character actors, you have the dialogue box at the bottom, where all your text is going to appear, and like little tiny character portraits that'll be like, this is who's talking to you right now. And so there's like minimal animation, but you're still like going through the story, paragraph by paragraph and screen by screen. And yeah, so basically what we do is like we take all of the different game assets, like the background art, the UI design, the character sprites, all those sorts of things, even things like the music and the script itself for the story, the English and the Kanien'kéha version, it all gets put into Unity through Nani Novel, and it like assembles it so that it runs as like one cohesive game.
That is cool. Is it like an what do they call that? Is it like a narrative where people go on a journey with?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what would they be? So you have a like a protagonist.
Yeah, so I could give you an example with what we're working on right now with the flying head. The story, the legend, is being told by the guy who like experienced it. I don't know if you're familiar with the legend of the flying head at
Oh,
all.
here, actually.
So it's basically about this hunter who has these two dogs that he has a very good relationship with, and he takes them on hunting trips. And whenever they go hunting, this guy is like such a good person that whenever he catches something, he comes back to the community and he gives his like find or his catch, whatever, to like elders and people in need. And these two dogs love him so much, and they're like a little family. And one day they go out hunting in the woods, and the woods are, there's something off. Something is very quiet. Even the dogs are acting nervous, and the hunter guy is like, what's going on here? The sun starts to go down, and then one of the dogs speaks to him, and the guy is like, what the hell? Because the voice from one of his dogs is like inside his head, almost like speaking to him mind to mind. And the dog is like, listen, buddy, there's something like a creature in these woods, and he knows you're here, and he's coming this way, and we've got to get the heck out of here. So they all start running, and they're running. And then eventually, like, the woods behind him start to glow. He looks back and he sees this monster on two legs with like talons and claws and scales on the two legs. And on top of the two legs is a giant head with like flaming hair and a hooked beak and like rows of nasty sharp teeth. And he's chasing the hunter and his two dogs. And they're running and they're running, and then like the thing is gaining on them, and it's burning the forest as it's like chasing them. And one of the dogs is like, well, you've been really good to me and my brother dog over here, so I'm gonna go and stall this monster so you two can escape. And he like turns away to go fight the monster, before like the hunter can be like, no, don't do that. And so the dog does his best, fights the monster, and ultimately dies. And they're running some more, and then the second dog kind of does the same thing because the flying head keeps catching up to them. And um, basically the story ends and the hunter makes it back to like the edge of his village, and the dogs saved his life because the monster won't go outside of the woods. And the whole moral of the story is about how we should have respect for dogs because it's like the origin story of how they became man's best friend, if you will, because they're like fierce protectors, and if you treat them with love and respect, they'll do the same for you. And I like to think of that story as like the reason everybody should be nicer to res dogs.
Yeah. Where'd my guy go? Come here.
Yeah. When I was rewriting the script, I was like, I always was sad that the dogs died in the end, and I was thinking like, am I going to change the ending? But no, I'll keep it. But the way I'll kind of like make myself feel better about the dogs dying is that in all of the art where after each of them has sacrificed themselves, you still see them, but like in spirit form, running beside the hunter, like they're always with him.
Does he get puppies when he gets home?
I like to think so.
And
there's always a fur baby in need of a home, especially
exactly. Yeah, and they're the descendants of these dogs.
Exactly.
That feels better. Yeah. So they're all together now. That's good. That's amazing. Yeah. That's a great story.
Thank you. Yeah, so I've rewritten it so that it's taking place in modern times, and like the story is being told by not like the hunter, but like the hunter's cousin, and the whole thing is like his cousin came to visit this hunter and his two dogs, and everyone was shocked about how goodly or how well behaved these dogs are because they're res dogs. And the hunter found them like tearing through his garbage at the back of his house that he has on the edge of the territory, and they go hunting together. And yeah, it's all a lot of similarities, but basically taking place like yesterday. Yeah.
I love how it's his cousin.
Yeah, because it's when people are telling stories, it's always, oh, my cousin was telling me, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's funny. Yeah. Well, that's amazing. I love that story. That's a great story. Yeah,
It's one of my favorites when I was a kid too. It's like the one that stuck out most in my mind. I even have. I'm just gonna grab quickly, if you don't mind, the book.
Absolutely.
It's like the book that I had when I was a kid. I'll be right back. So this is the book that I grew up reading, like the story of the flying head. It says, "Ganun Stooges, the flying head." Yeah, and like whenever I think of this legend, there's this one picture in particular that like sticks out in my mind because it's just, I don't know. Let me see if I can find it really quickly. I saw it and as a kid and went, oh God. I just imagined seeing that. Oh, here it is. It's the very last one in the book where like the hunter has made it back to the village and he just sees this staring at him from the edge of the woods, and it scared the crap out of me as a kid in like second grade.
Yeah. Like, how do you ever get the courage to go back into the woods again?
I don't know. Well, it usually helped that I wasn't in there at night. I was there with my dad and my whole family. Usually one of our pets. Sometimes one of our cats even. There was this one cat we had named Puss in Boots because, kids are very original. Yeah. And he was like an indoor-outdoor cat. And yeah, we would like walk in the trails in the bush around the community, and we thought the cat was at home. And then randomly he would pop up on the trail in front of us like, hey, and then like disappear back into the bush. He was a real character.
We got actually the youngest cat. We had two they were all feral cats too that we got. Two of them were we were rented a cabin, and they came up at the end of the summer. It was like, hello, we've been here all the whole time, but now we're all home. So we took them home, and then this other one we found, it was in behind the garage at in the KZ. It was like, oh, hello. So we took him, but I was trying to shoot video. We were doing this language camp for a week, and I was trying to shoot some interviews, with the elders and stuff. And we get into some really serious conversations, like some really kind of sensitive material. And so we're shooting these elders, and they're talking about some really sensitive stuff. And I realized in the background, because they're sitting in front of a prospector's tent,
okay,
tents, and they're kind of held up with the
like the sticks.
Yeah, Yeah. Like the small trees kind of, thing. And so I'm watching the guy talking, and I'm hearing this story, and it's just, oh my God, it's heartbreaking. And I
Yeah.
suddenly realize the kitten is climbing up behind him. And kind of, hangs out for a bit and then jumps to the other side and climbs down. And I thought, okay, well, that's it. And then comes back.
So it's all in the footage. There's like this very tragic story being told, and then in the background, there's a cat like jumping around in the tree.
Little kitten just jumping around, and it was funny because he stayed close to us. Like we were in the bush, like we're 20 miles like into the bush, and we're there for a week, and he stuck close. Like he didn't bugger off. He didn't, I had to rescue him from the kids a couple of times. Like one kid, of course, threw him in the water and whatnot. So we just kind of had one designated kid and he came when you called him. Like it was really kind of weird. Yeah, he's a res cat.
Yeah, yeah.
Used to be you wouldn't think that the res cats would survive, but they did. They do.
Yeah. There's so many of them. Like my cat that just passed in September last year, she was a res cat. I was walking home from one of my friends' houses, and there was like this big thunderstorm coming, and I used to like be really scared of thunderstorms. So my dad was like meeting me halfway while I was walking home. And so when we met up, he was like, "Yeah, I passed that cigarette shop on the way here, and I heard a kitten meowing underneath it. If you go crawl under there and grab that cat, you can keep her." So I did. And she, like, when I found her under there, she was sitting on like the struts of the trailer that the store was on, and she was hissing at me. She was swiping at me, but she was like this big. She was just a little baby. So, I got her and she was scratching me up, but I didn't care. And then, like, after, a week of her being like, oh, they're feeding me pretty consistently, she, like, really settled down and got really nice. And I had her for like 14 years before she passed away. And now I have her in a little urn on my bedside table. So she's still, when I wake up, she's still staring at me the way she did when she was alive.
Cute. I
Yeah.
love that.
My special girl.
What did you call her?
I called her Puddin.
That's so
Yeah.
sweet.
She was one of those cats that didn't really like anybody other than me. So everyone else was like, they didn't hate her, but they were like not as upset when she passed away, But that's why I liked her, because she was like my sweet special baby. She was like my guard cat.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
like this guy. Like he follows me everywhere. He's my shadow.
Yeah.
It's just doesn't matter where I go. I step on him sometimes because I don't realize he's behind me.
Yeah. Like, he's running between your feet when you're trying to get somewhere, so you like kick him accidentally.
And then, when he kind of spins.
Yeah. It was the same with Puddin.
You're like, ah!
Yeah. And then you feel so bad after. You're like, oh, sorry, baby.
So you try to pin this guy. You try to pick him up, and he's like, get away from me. I'm mad at you.
Just hurt me. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It was an accident.
Didn't mean to.
Yeah.
Oh, here comes another one. Meow.
Oh, I
hear them. Yeah, that's Flash. The brothers are Flash and Dash.
Oh my God. I
Yeah.
guess they get the zooms a lot.
Yeah. Well, plus we were, I was during the summer when we were running an Indigenous interactive multimedia program. So with youth and stuff. And so it was all about, computers and stuff. And so Flash and Dash. And then the other one we call Biznadze, which means mischief, like mischievous. Yeah. So we just mostly biz. So now Flash wants to cuddle up against the table and make it rock. Thanks for that, Flash. But yeah, do you ever
talk about them?
Yeah, no. As soon as you start talking about them, they show up. Don't jump up, okay? Please don't jump up. Yeah, easy boy. So what other you do 3D animation?
Mm-hmm.
I love the whole video game thing. I could talk about that for hours.
Same.
Yeah. What other ones have you done? What other games have you created?
So a bunch of them were made for an immersion school that like wants to keep the resources proprietary. So like I'm not allowed to show images or videos of them, which I totally understand, because there's some things you want to keep just for community, which is part of why we decided to make our own language learning games, to be able to be like, okay, well, you guys can keep your resources over there, and we'll make our own here. And the stuff that we make will be, what we share with the community at large.
Are they all first person, kind of like people narrative, or people?
Yeah. It's either all the stories are being told by like one of the characters in the story usually, and they're like directly addressing the person playing the game, like, oh hey, this is the story I'm going to tell you today, and it's happened to me or my cousin or whoever.
Is it more of an adventure that they go through? It's not like something where they get so many points, or they, like.
Yeah, it's definitely more of a story thing, because we're not trying to, I don't know, bloat the games too much with like, oh, go and collect 20 of these or go fight that guy. Like the focus is really on language learning. So the way the games are going to work is there's like the story element of like learning the legend or the retelling of the legend that we're working on in our case. And then there's going to be these language exercises that use the specific vocabulary used in the stories and like the specific tense and gender and verb conjugation. So I think that's a way for the language, especially since it's like polysynthetic, and a verb-based language. So it's super complicated because like if you take my name Kahentawaks, for example, it looks like one long word, but it means, I've heard, either shaker of the field or she moves with the grass. And that's like a whole sentence. So that's kind of a huge learning curve for people trying to learn Kanien'kéha, because there's two ways it can be spoken. There's kind of like the child version where each word is just its own word, like I eat the sandwich. And then the adult version would have I eat the sandwich all in one word with all the proper pronouns and nouns and verbs incorporated into one word. So it's like a huge jump from like the one-to-one verb, one-to-one word translation, and then into having it all incorporated together. So by focusing on just like one specific story and the specific words and the specific gender and pronouns and tense used in there, it kind of, instead of being overwhelmed by learning all of Kanien'kéha, you have this smaller environment to be like, oh, well, I understand because of the way this story was told. I know a lot of vocabulary about hunting and about the woods and about the past tense because it's being told like it happened in the past. And so it kind of creates these smaller environments that are easier to learn in like more of a digestible chunk, instead of something like learning on Duolingo where you're learning just random words that are disconnected with things. You're given a context to learn them in as well.
Do you have gender in the
Mm-hmm.
language? There is gender, but not as related in a sentence. It's more like, because we don't really have gender.
So there's gender. It's specifically like recently when I was talking with our language consultant, he explained to me that Mohawk is like a verb-based language, but also it's less about describing the things in a situation, but about describing the actions and relationships of the things in the situation. So there'll be gender and pronoun for like me, you, him, her, and then it goes a bit farther into like two of them who are male, two of them who are female, and then three or more. So there's gender in terms of that, but there's also like it in terms of inanimate objects like water bottle or table. But he even took it a bit further and said certain first language speakers, when they introduce an object, they'll say it, and then at some point they'll switch to he, like it's a living thing, like, oh yeah, pass me that guy over there, instead of saying pass me the fork. Yeah. So obviously I'm not a language expert, so I might have explained it a bit wonky, but yeah, there's gender all over the place.
That makes sense.
Mm.
It's the same in Algonquin. I mean, I don't speak the language, but I just know a few words. But it's more about what's alive and what isn't. So animate, inanimate.
Yeah, it's similar with us too.
Yeah, and I had a cousin. Excuse me. Her first language was Algonquin,
Mm.
and so whenever she was talking about person, you kind of have to wait till the end to figure out who the person was, or if that was a male or a female, because she would be speaking English, but she would refer to everybody as he.
Okay.
It'd hang in there, and or you could tell by context who she was talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
Until the end, when you know, when you've or she'd say the name, or because the pronouns, it was really, that was something that didn't come naturally or easily to her, was to refer to someone by pronoun.
Yeah, yeah.
And actually, I kind of get that now, because I have a friend who refers to themselves as they, and I never thought that would be an issue for me.
Yeah, yeah.
But it is. I keep saying she.
Yeah, it's like so ingrained in your mind, right? And it's a habit you don't realize you have until you try and make the effort to say they. Like, I've definitely had that struggle in the past few years. It's really like forming a new habit, you know?
It really is. I was talking to another artist, and someone of my age, and he said, "Oh yeah, we're from a different generation." I'm like, "Thank God," because I just thought, "What's wrong with my brain that I can't remember there? It's not hard. It's not I'm not trying to be disrespectful."
Yeah, and it's not even like a new word that you have to learn. It's just something you know, but that you're used to using in a different way.
Exactly. And there's got to be. I was thinking about that when learning an Indigenous language. That's got to kind of be the same kind of thing, because
Yeah.
of the way that gender isn't, like, as opposed to European languages where excuse me, even objects have gender.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I definitely remember that learning, French going through high school here and being like, oh, what do you mean objects have gender? You don't just say it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whereas female, like,
Yeah, yeah. And then trying to figure out, but why? How do you know which one is which?
exactly. And then and then if you're talking about something and you don't know, is this a, like, if you're just learning the name of the thing, the object, like, is it a female object? Is it a male? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it changes the spelling, it changes everything, it changes the pronunciation, it changes everything. Have you found that and I'm going to ask, just because I'm interested in this, kind of leads me to talk about protocols a little bit, like just the ways of which, like, when you look at, like, language has a certain way of doing things, and you've spoken a little bit about how that gets translated into the digital world, how the language does. Are there other kind of learning knowledge transference protocols? Because we always told stories to our kids, observing that kind of thing. So is there, do you find you come up, not against, but that's incorporated, the kind of knowledge transfer? It's different kind of, like we talked earlier about intellectual property. Like, how does that get, used now in a digital sense?
Yeah, yeah. That's an interesting question. When it comes to making the video games, I haven't encountered a lot of not disputes, but issues with dealing with intellectual property or protocols for sharing knowledge, because what we're primarily dealing with are legends that a lot of people know already. Every community that I know of, anyway, and probably more that I don't know of, have some version of a similar story. So there's like this mutual understanding that the story belongs to everybody. And I could see it getting kind of iffy if we were charging like Indigenous people to access the stories, right? Because then you're kind of claiming ownership, and it gets really icky with making money off of it, when it's like something that's not owned by any one person, but because we're using these stories to, transfer the stories themselves, like share culture that way, and also teach language, and the people that we do share it with from outside the community, like we're charging them to enable us to create more stories and share more language. So that's like our way of dealing with it. But like, I don't really see us making games for that, for example, deal with a lot of ceremonial stuff, because that's where some issues will develop. Because you and I know there are things that are meant for community members only, and there are certain things that are only meant for certain members of the community and certain societies. So yeah, we're not going to deal with those because that's a whole other can of worms. But during the pandemic, I saw an interesting way of ceremonial stuff being taught because, we weren't allowed to gather in large numbers. But there were these Zoom seminars that I took part in where there was a guy from Aguasasne who I think is a longhouse chief, and he was doing Zoom seminars to teach all about our seasonal longhouse ceremonies. And while speaking about the ceremonies, there's obviously a lot of things that are like totally fine to talk about because they're community ceremonies, and it's all about teaching, the teachings to community members and encouraging them to come to Longhouse and things like that. But then there are elements that are not meant to be shared outside the community. And the way he dealt with that was just by saying, well, this next part, if you are taking notes, I would respectfully remind you of like the private nature of this topic. So if you are writing notes, it's fine if you're doing it by hand. But if you're on any sort of like, I don't know, huge platform like what is it, Microsoft 360, you're in the online version of Microsoft Word, don't take notes there of this next part. If you're on Google Docs, don't write that there. So I think it's as long as those kinds of resources or knowledge sharing events or the tools that we're using to transfer knowledge are being made and managed by community members, then there's no issue, because everybody from the community knows how important it is to like what to keep to ourselves and what we can share. And if you've ever been to a protest where people are singing honor songs and there's reporters around, you know how serious people take it, because I've seen dudes like grab cameras and like push them down to the ground so that people don't record certain parts of what's going on, because it's not meant to be broadcast publicly. Like if you're there, you witness it, you're lucky. It doesn't mean we're sharing it with the whole world right now.
Exactly. I've seen that a lot, like opening ceremonies, that kind of thing during the prayer. It's one thing to when the elder is talking about, there's always a little they give a talk and then they do the opening prayer, and having to remind people over and over again, please don't record the prayer.
Yeah, like at the beginning of powwow, right? When they're doing the I think grand entry, there's certain parts here they ask you don't take pictures.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But again, yeah, people do.
Yeah, there's always a few, and then you just end up, people giving them dirty looks the rest of powwow, like, watch that one.
I know, right? It's so true, because they don't either respect or
they just weren't listening. They weren't paying attention. They think they're at like, it is a tourist event sometimes. We're inviting people to the community to come meet us and see what it's all about, but like, at least listen up for the first few minutes. Like there's an opening for a reason to explain to you how things are going to go.
Exactly. Or the closing, for that matter. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I wondered about that whole knowledge transfer, because I know it's not, I don't think intellectual property is I like the word stewardship.
Yeah, I like that word too.
And it belongs to
it kind of eliminates the ownership, right? Because like with the stories, nobody owns the stories. Like the Mohawk people and Oneida people are not going to be at each other's throats like, that's my story. It's like, no, bro, it's our stories. Yeah.
I've done that where I've done talks in schools, and or I might tell one, like the bear story, I might tell a creation story, and I've actually had teachers come up to me later and say, oh, can you write that story down for me? I want to talk about that story in my class and have the kids make puppets.
That's weird.
That is weird. Like, will you have an elder present? Will they be, will you be discussing the sacred nature? Because I always say this is a sacred story.
Yeah.
In our community, this is one of our creation stories, and we have several.
Yeah.
But this is sacred, and that's the thing. We held a conference. 2 things came out, and one of them it's exactly as you said. Some things should not go on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, when you're looking at the Canadian copyright law, somebody might take that knowledge and use it in something and then copyright it, and then it becomes theirs. And it's so
Yeah.
easy. It's so easy for that to happen.
Yep.
And so the alternative is well, something that Doki's First Nation was doing was they were doing interviews with elders. They were recording ceremony and whatnot, but as far as I know, but it wasn't going online. It was going on in their library.
Mm.
And so people would have to go into the library to access it, and they had to be members, and they had to have like permission.
Yep. That makes like perfect sense to me. Like as long as it's being managed by us, then that's it. That's kind of in with the whole data management thing to make sure like we're the ones deciding how it's being used, who has access to it, and if the way that it's being used is beneficial for the community and not, just to tick some diversity box or whatever for some huge corporation.
That's insulting. I mean, I remember in the past there were people who came to our community and spent time and walked away with it and used it for their dissertations.
Like extracting, right? Like just coming in to take, and then like, what are the community members who gave you like all of their time? What do you get out of it? Nothing.
Exactly. And this is time that, I mean, it happened with my grandmother, and that was till we'd be up there during the summers. I mean, she passed when I was 14. So it was very precious.
Yeah.
And here's this anthropologist, interceding and spending time and taking away the time that should have been spent teaching her grandkids.
Yep.
And then she wandered off with it, and we never saw it or the material or anything again.
Yeah. There's no reciprocity in that kind of an interaction. It's just, makes you feel more like a subject being studied than a participant, with any kind of agency to determine how the work that you're doing is going to be used properly. You're just like there to do your, look Indigenous. I'll snap a photo.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. That's right. Yeah. I remember we were teasing. We're up in the community, and it was one of the rare family gatherings, because everybody, my dad and his siblings, they all, everyone lived in different places. And we're always, as growing up urban, people would be, oh, are you a real Indian? You're not a real Indian.
Yeah. I get that today where they're like, you don't look Indigenous. And I'm like, oh, yeah? What's an Indigenous person look like? Would you show me a picture?
Exactly. I get it all the time. Like, well, you're too white to be Indian.
Oh my God. Even like since starting like the Revital, my game studio with my sister, we've had like a few interviews and our pictures taken for like, I don't know, CBC or CTV articles. And then if you're brave enough to go in the comment section, there's always some like little buttheads in there like, those are white women. They don't look Indigenous.
Wow. Yeah, that's it. I remember I was talking to this young artist, and she's saying, she was from South America, actually. She says they don't monetize being Indigenous in South America the way they do here with the grants and the granting system and, diversity and that kind of thing. She said, you don't admit, and so she said to me, and she had moved to Toronto, and she's like, the urban Indigenous experience is real. It's a valid experience.
Yeah. It's not everybody has the chance to grow up on the territory, because it can either be like a difficult place to live, or you need to get a job, you need to support your family. And then there's often a housing crisis going on, because it's this small patch of land and we love to have kids.
Yeah, we do.
I know so many people who are living in like intergenerational households. Like you've got your grandma, you've got your mom and dad, you've got you, probably some of your cousins. even like before we started recording, I was telling you I was living just me, myself, with my two sisters, the boyfriends, and my niece. And like, even I think in today's context too, with like, capitalism being what it is, more and more people, Indigenous or not, are living like that because it just makes financial sense.
Yes. Well, the nuclear family was, literally that. It came out of the nuclear era. Like,
Yeah.
before that, we all well, I mean, for our community, we always lived intergenerational. I mean, it
Yeah.
was the grandparents who taught the kids.
Mm-hmm.
The parents were busy making sure everybody was fed and clothed and warm, and
Yeah.
it was always the grandparents.
Yeah.
And it wasn't this, that the parents had their kids in their 40s either. It was the kid,
Yeah.
So there wasn't that big. The age gap was different as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it was,
For sure.
yeah, it was the
Times.
grandparents who raised them, because um, the parents were busy trying to make sure everybody was fed.
Yeah. They were dealing with the immediate, the right now.
Yeah, exactly. And the same, like, I mean, I was fortunate on my mom's side, my grandmother lived with us.
Mm.
I'm forever grateful for.
Yeah.
We got along like really well. My grandmother and I. She was an amazing. She was actually a little Scottish woman from Aberdeen, feisty,
Oh my
feisty.
God.
Oh wow! She used to say she in a stage whisper. She'd be like, "If they don't like it, they can go to hell." I'm like, right on, Granny. And then my mother would come in, and I'd be like, "Right on, Granny."
Yeah. Sounds hilarious.
Yeah, she was a hoot. She was a real hoot, and gave me a lot of, like, when you see the stick-withedness, the determination, the feistiness of the community.
Mm-hmm.
Like I saw that, but it was always at a distance, because if I had lived on reserve growing up, I would have gone to residential school.
Mm-hmm.
So my
Yeah.
parents made the decision to raise us in Toronto.
Yep.
But
It was like a survival thing,
exactly,
You don't always have a choice.
no, but it created a distance
Yeah.
between. I didn't learn, of course, none of them, my dad and his family, none of them ever taught their kids the language. Oh, you're not going to need that. That's just going to make you different. It's going to make it harder for you.
Yeah, exactly. My grandmother had the same attitude. Like she was fluent, but she didn't teach her kids. My dad didn't find out he was Indigenous until he was like in his 20s, because my grandmother was like, nope, nope, nope. Because she didn't go to residential school, but her brother did. And so she was like, she had all these negative connotations about the language and what it meant to be Indigenous. So she would just like, I knew she had a Mohawk name. And when she came to visit us later in life, I would kind of try and ask her, like, what's your Kanien'kehá name? And she was like, no, I don't like it. It's ugly. And she just like never spoke. She never like, I don't know. She had a lot of shame,
Exactly. That's what they did. And even if you
Yeah.
didn't, like my dad, he went when he was really young to residential school. But then my grandmother managed to, because she was from Kanien'kéha and my grandfather was from Rapid Lake. She managed, even in like, because she married a Rapid Lake Indian, she wasn't supposed to be able to live in Kanien'kéha
Oh, okay.
because she
Yeah.
became a Rapid Laker, right? And
Yeah. She married out.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
but the chief in KZ at the time, William Commanda, he said, "Okay, I've got a house here," and he was able to rent a house. Like she was able to rent. So my dad grew up in KZ,
Mm.
and then she managed to get the kids into the school in Maniwaki. But of course, that didn't go well either, because the kids didn't want any savages attending.
Yeah.
Savage.
All that fun stuff.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
but so even when you go to the public, and even when I was in the public school system, whenever the topic of Indigenous relations or anything came up, it was always negative. It was always negative.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
couldn't believe it. It's like, wait a minute, this doesn't look anything like my family.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was like one of the only Indig kids in the whole school. There was one other guy, but he moved. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I'm alone.
Yeah. I'm the only one.
Yeah. So I can see that regardless of where they went to school, and the church too had a big hand in making
Oh yeah.
the shame.
Yeah, they're big on that, the shame and the guilt.
Exactly. I still have it.
Bread and butter.
I'm a recovering Catholic. and it never goes away. It never really goes away. It's like, but you learn to recognize it. It's like, wait a minute.
Yeah. You have the self-awareness to be like, I know where this feeling is coming from.
Like, I remember you.
My old nemesis.
So it was fortunate. Were you able to grow up more in the cultural and in the spirituality, like in the longhouse?
Yeah. So basically, my mom is from Kanehsatake. She grew up there. She was there during 1990 and all that. And my dad grew up in Chateauguay, just outside of Kanehsatake. So around 1990 is actually when he found out that he was Indigenous, and he saw everything that was going on, and he felt really like, oh my God, I've got to do something. So he went through all of this trouble to like reconnect with members of the community. He found these two elders in Kanehsatake that I don't know their names of, and I've tried to ask my mom, but she doesn't remember because it was such a long time ago. But basically, he explained his situation to them and how he wanted to like learn the culture and be a part of the community and reconnect and all that. And so for a few summers in a row, they basically worked my dad to the bone in like the garden because they had him growing traditional tobacco. And yeah, so basically he was trading like, labor and stuff like that for knowledge and helping them out around the garden and stuff. And then during 1990, my dad he saw Ellen Gabriel actually on TV, and she was giving some kind of speech, and my dad was like, damn, I've got to get behind the barricades at Kanehsatake. So he scooted over there, and he tried to get through the barricades to be with the people at the treatment center at the time, and like he had a lot of trouble doing that, and he wasn't able to in the end. And then 1990, resolved the way it did. And a year later, they had the commemorative powwow at, not at the Pines, but at like the canoe club grounds. And then my Auntie Cheryl on my mom's side, so my mom's sister, met my dad, ran to find my mom, and was like, I found a man for you. And so, yeah, a year later, I was born.
Those aunties, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. What a great story.
Yeah, it's crazy too because my dad's mother is actually from Kanehsatake and she had just moved away. So I don't know if you've ever been to Kanehsatake, but right near the Pines there was the graveyard that kind of started the whole thing in 1990 because they wanted to make it into a golf course. If you go in there, there's like so many tombstones with some variation of spelling of Tiewishaw, my last name, on it. But there's like not that many Tiewishaw families on the reservation anymore because a lot of them went to residential school and got really messed up by that. So yeah, I guess my grandmother on my dad's side was part of the generation that saw all the residential school stuff happening and decided, nope, I'm gonna get out of here. And then the kind of funny thing is my dad went back and now here I am.
Fabulous. But it's a real it's a great story of redemption, and what can come from that.
Exactly. And like my dad, growing up, he did I mentioned he spent time with some elders in Kanehsatake learning how to grow tobacco. So that's what I and me and my siblings spent a lot of time doing during the summer when we were kids. Like when we were younger, we had kind of this bratty attitude about it of like, oh yeah, the other kids on summer vacation, they all swim in their pools and ride their bikes and have a good time. And my dad is like, you got to be back at 4:00 because we're watering the garden. Yeah. So that's a skill that me and my siblings have now is like we really know how to grow tobacco.
That's amazing though. I mean, that's lost. It's lost.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a thing. And it's pretty cool that we have these, I guess you would consider them heirloom seeds because it's a traditional plant and my dad earned those seeds from the guys that taught him how to grow it in Kanehsatake. And for a lot of summers in a row our family was growing those crops and saving the seeds, and my dad still has them to this day. Yeah, and I think he since all of my siblings and I obviously were grown up and we've moved out, so we don't have the big family garden anymore. And my dad was starting to get concerned that our seeds for the tobacco were really old, so he like tried growing a little patch of it this summer, and they're still good. So he's got even more seeds now.
That's fantastic. Well, they can.
Yeah.
It's amazing that they. I was talking to an archaeologist here in Ottawa, and they talked about how they had found, like, how they knew that this had been a trading area. They
Mm.
said the vase that they found was like from Florida.
Yeah, yeah.
The seeds inside the vase were from South America.
Mm.
So it
Yeah.
just
You did have all those connections, all the way up and down. Like there were trails and we were talking to each other.
absolutely.
Because like I have this, my best example of this is that, obviously there's no alligators in Canada. There's no alligators or crocodiles in New York. But in like Kanien'kéha culture, we have an alligator dance that we learned from, I guess, the Seminoles, you know? So we've got some connections.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's that whole eagle and the condor.
Yeah.
The eagle and the condor. And yeah, absolutely. I mean, there were millions of us. There's so many. They say up to like 97% of the population
Yeah.
died with contact. I've worked with an elder, Albert Dumont, and he was saying that, I mean, Algonquin territory is huge.
Mm-hmm.
Waters of the Ottawa River and all the way down to Lake Ontario and St. Lawrence River.
Mm-hmm.
It's enormous. He says, so we had to have a population to defend that territory.
Yeah.
And we did, he said. But around, I'm not sure, like about the turn of the century, 1900s, he said our population was so depleted. There were maybe he said like 2,000 of us left.
Yeah.
And once we were millions.
Yeah. They say a similar thing about like Iroquois people, I guess, Haudenosaunee people.
Mm-hmm.
That around the time of contact, I think, if I'm remembering my 7th grade social studies correctly, we had something like 9 million people. And then, in a few generations, because of diseases and war and crap, we were decimated. And we didn't have millions anymore. It was like thousands.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Even my own community, they said that there were of over just like the extended community, there was like over 1,000 families.
Mm-hmm.
So you figure there's got to be at least like, how many people in a family, right?
Yeah.
And then
Probably a lot.
you know how we love to have children.
Yeah.
But TB struck.
Mm-hmm.
And by the end of it, and how we got to be where we are kind of now, there was less than 100 families left.
Oh my God.
Yeah, because and they say that during the time of contact with the diseases, you might not even have to see or be around a settler to, if somebody had been and then came down to the village, like COVID, right?
Yeah.
And next thing you know, somebody 500 miles or 6,000, whatever miles away, they're dying of that disease.
And taking their whole intergenerational household with them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The whole community is wiped out. And
yeah,
didn't even have to like go anywhere.
Yep.
So it was, I can't imagine. That's a whole part of our history that I don't think anybody's really ever touched on. That it would just be devastating. I can't. Well, a couple of little things. And that's not true. There was, I remember there was some sort of part of a different, like, the story wasn't about the Indig, but it was part of that story. There was something about that where people were dying, but so you think the trauma started there, and then it, went on from there until here we are.
I've heard people say things like there's this idea these days, everyone's thinking, about the climate crisis and the apocalypse and all that stuff. And then Indigenous people are like, I'm still here. I'm living in a post-apocalyptic world right now.
Yeah. We've been kind of doing that for a long time.
Yeah, we've got experience. Bring it in.
Exactly. Yeah, and we would probably be the ones to survive because of the skills that.
Yeah, exactly. Because we've been living on this land for thousands and thousands of years, and we might know a thing or two about surviving tumultuous changes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that was the one thing about my community. It was isolated, not necessarily remote. Well, it was, but now there's, with the highway going through, like all of that sort of stuff. At one point, they were trying to stop them from clear cutting somebody's hunting grounds, basically.
Mhm. Yeah.
And the cops, they created this. The government came in and created this Jane or John Doe. What do you get that orders to keep that you have to stay away?
Injunction?
Yeah, it's more like if somebody's going to hurt you,
Restraining
restraining
order.
order. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, yay. um, so it was like as long as you were from Barrier Lake, you weren't allowed to be in that area.
Oh, what the hell?
Yeah, yeah,
That's very specific.
exactly, because it was the Barrier Lakes. It was our community who were trying to stop them from clear cutting, somebody's hunting and trapping grounds, and so the people protested and were there anyway, and they were literally throwing tear gas at women and children, as they do,
Yeah.
especially in Quebec.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and this woman, the thing is though, at one point they were gathered in a spot and they didn't know, like they thought if they surrounded them that they wouldn't have food, they wouldn't have, and this woman, she's I've always liked her, she's always been really feisty. She's her eyes are streaming, like she's tear gas, right? And she said, "You think you can come here and that you can make us leave? You've been here maybe 100 years. Us, we've been here for 5,000 years. We know how to live on this land. We're not going anywhere." And it just struck me like, holy, like how true. Like, like she wasn't just saying that. It wasn't bravado. That was just truth.
A fact.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. They know the land. They know, and that's what they were trying to stop them from. And it makes me wonder. Our language is locative, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's based on geography.
Yes.
So words in our language come from areas where either there's medicine or something has occurred, but they become words in our language that have meaning.
Yeah.
What happens to those words when that geography is clear cut?
Yeah.
Because that connection back to the land has been severed.
Yeah, because like I imagine it has something to do with like the shape of the land and some distinguishing characteristics, like where the pines grow. What happens when there aren't any pines anymore? You have to change the word, or
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I
yeah,
know
I don't
language
think
evolves, but
yeah, yeah. I don't think necessarily you have to make a new word for the place name. I might even be against like making a new word because then it shows the changes that the land has undergone, Like even if the name was, where the pines grow and the pines were clear cut, it can still be called that because then it shows, the people speaking that language are still here. And once there were pines and now there aren't, but the people persist,
exactly. Yeah, that's so true. That is so true.
And when we get into like, the digital contexts of stuff, when you're dealing with a language that is thoroughly rooted in land-based knowledge and experiences and relationships, people start asking questions about like, how is that going to translate into the digital, where, you're working in one territory with, people way the heck in that territory. Like, how do you deal with language that's locative, you know? And I think you kind of just do continue what you're doing because as long as the people themselves that are speaking whichever Indigenous language are still living, working, and creating on their ancestral land, like the people are not going to be removed from that context. And so the language they're speaking will remain in that context. And so the tools that they make to learn that language, are still going to be connected to it in a way. So the responsibility for maintaining, the connection to the land isn't necessarily on the tools that you're creating. It's more with the people that are making the technology and speaking the language. So it's more up to us than it is to the machines.
Yeah, it would be. I wonder though. I mean, when you're looking at working with the digital tools,
Mm-hmm.
if you're translating the tools into the language, now what words, like what you would refer. I mean, I remember Jacob um, getting the elders together and saying, okay, we need a word for microwave.
Yeah, yeah. Those are some fun discussions. I think I tried to ask in like this Kanien'kéha Facebook group, where it's kind of like a language resource where you can post and ask, how do I say this? How do I say that? And I asked people like, what would you call artificial intelligence, or what would you call a computer? And the people were just like, depends on who you ask, because everyone's got a different idea or a different way to describe those things. So whatever word they come up with is going to differ from somebody else's, depending on how they understand the way those things work or what their relationships are with it.
Yeah, exactly. And what do you think about, I mean, some people are not thrilled with the idea of digitization or even videotaping elders because they say that that breaks the relationship between the elder and the youth generation.
Yeah, I understand that, because there is a not, negligible amount of people that sort of hide behind technology, or they're really shy and they aren't comfortable speaking with elders or connecting with community members. But I think there's even like a large amount of people that are ready for the digital stuff to come through, because it's sort of, as long as you understand, like with everything in life, it has to come with a balance. You can use these digital tools to help yourself become more familiar with the language, or learn a bit more of our traditional stories, or a bit more of our culture. But like, if you think about using some kind of digital resource to learn language, you're only going to get so far, because at some point you're going to have to speak with a real person, because like at the end of the day, the goal of language learning is to reintegrate it as like our main language in our communities. And for that to happen, you've got to go out and talk to community members. So yeah, you can use these digital tools, and I think they're great, and I think it could be really helpful for the community, but like it doesn't stop there, and it's not going to be a substitute for talking with real people. It's like just meant as a tool for the right now, probably into the future too, while speakers are so scarce, and a lot of them, because there's limited speakers, then there's limited classes and limited spots in those classes, only happening at certain times of the day. So it's a necessary, I think, tool for right now to like get people to be able to learn on their own, because there just aren't enough teachers. But the goal ultimately, is to get people speaking to each other. And yeah, just keep that goal in mind, and don't think that you're going to be fluent learning Mohawk just by, studying home alone. It'll help if you're, a self-starter and you're studying on your own, but like, what is the point of learning this language if you're not going to go out and talk to people with it?
Absolutely. You're right. It's great that we have these tools that we can use to generate knowledge and to help pass that knowledge along. But in the end, it's still about community. It's the values. It's not just maintaining, reclaiming, and renewing our commitment to these values and principles that we want to pass on to the next generations.
Exactly. You can't just remove it, from the context it's in.
And it's great to use the digital, I think, for video games and to teach language to kids, especially because that's what they know.
Yeah, it's like familiar to them. And if you think about it, when you're learning most languages in the world, there's some kind of Duolingo, Rosetta Stone, or you're like watching the news or reading the paper in that language. And that's something that's really difficult for Indigenous communities to do, because there are a limited number of speakers, limited number of teachers. Like, I don't know of a single first or second language speaker that has just one job. They're constantly being asked to teach, to create resources, to like be on podcasts, because people are just trying to create Indigenous language media for people to be able to use and practice and learn with. And it's freaking hard because you got to learn the language first. You got to understand how to teach it. It's a whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many dialects. Even
exactly, like across different communities too, they'll have slight variations, and each one has to, have its due attention given to it.
I remember in Kanien'kéha they have an immersion program and whatnot, but they were talking about resources, and they only had, I literally in the 90s maybe had 5 speakers of that particular dialect.
That's hard.
And then so I think they were reaching out to Akwesasne and to like Kanien'kehá, and like they were to other communities. They were bringing in and the same thing in Kitigan-Zibi, the dialect there, because they came from the Lake of Two Mountains area, is a totally different dialect from Rapid Lake or Barrier Lake. Same thing. Because they were within the territory, like within this, they were about 3.5 hours north of here. So they didn't really leave their territory the way KZ came up from, like that was the most northern part of their territory when they came to where they are now. So yeah, there's so many different dialects, and that factors in it as well. You know?
Yeah. So the way we're going to address that, I think, in our video games is like, we just have to acknowledge, the dialect that we're working with, because we don't want to put forward the idea that like this is the version of Kanien'kehá that people are that should be speaking, because like right now I'm from Kanehsatake, but the language person or consultant that we're working with is from Kahnawake. So I'm imagining something like at the beginning of our video game, we'll have some type of, not a credit, but a note like, oh, this game was, created with, 2 different communities in mind. So there's probably going to be some of the Kanehsatake dialect. There's probably going to be some of the Kahnawake dialect. And depending on the consultants we work with as these games are created, we'll put like a little note like, just please remember, this is from these dialects, and it might not be the same in your particular community. In some distant future, when these games are finished or we have more games, I'm imagining applying for some type of grant to do localization, where like all of the art, the game is made. We just need to work with a particular specialist to, make this specific to your community.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. That's what we were kind of looking at too, is sort of having the pieces in place and then being able to speak to the different communities and putting in the language as appropriate, like on the different communities we were talking to. But
yeah, it's a big job.
It is. It's huge. And I like Kachimigwich, man. Like, wow, the work you're doing is so important. It's historical. No, that's not the right word. It's incredibly important for the next generations. Kachimigwich, it's amazing. Thanks so much for talking to me today. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Me as well. I feel like I'm just chatting with a friend, I kind of forgot this is the whole interview thing.
That's the best part. I like those the best.